A military woman who has been through the most dangerous places on the planet was targeted by a police officer simply because of the color of her skin. In an ordinary shopping center, where she was just trying to buy sneakers, she was detained by an officer who pulled out a gun. Without any reason, without any evidence. Just because she was a black woman. This is more than just an incident. It's something that destroys the lives of millions every day. Karen Hill was standing in a sports shoe store in the heart of the city. Her black t-shirt and jeans didn't stand out among the customers, and that's exactly what she wanted, a normal day, without too much attention. She rarely allowed herself moments like this, weekends that belonged only to her. She, like most people, liked time to herself, without unnecessary conversations and stares. Today, Karen decided to spend the day without worries. 2 decades of service in the Army, participation in peacekeeping operations, saving lives during the most difficult missions seemed to leave her emotionless. She was used to tough challenges, to constant stress, to the fact that she had to be at her best in any situation. But here, among the shelves of sneakers, she didn't have to be Major Hill making decisions on the battlefield. She was just a woman who wanted to find a pair of comfortable shoes. But something was wrong. Someone was looking at her. At first, Karen didn't pay any attention to it. It was a big store, and everyone could look at others. But the more she was among the shelves, the more it became uncomfortable. Real attention. Looks that didn't just look curious. No, it was something more. As she was choosing a pair of sneakers that fit her, a woman standing next to her picked up her phone and started taking pictures. Karen tensed slightly, but didn't pay attention. She had come here for herself, and nothing was going to spoil her day. But then something changed. Her eyes involuntarily turned to the man standing at the entrance to the store. He was a middle-aged policeman in ordinary clothes, but his police ID was visible on his belt, and on the other side was a weapon. He stood there, not moving, as if he were watching. Karen felt her heart beat a little faster. He didn't look like an ordinary customer. His gaze was directed directly at her, and it was no accident. She couldn't help but notice how his gaze changed as he walked by. Instead of turning to other people, he fixates more and more on her figure. And now, when she approaches the cash register to pay for her new sneakers, he reappears on the horizon. It is unclear whether he is really standing so close, or whether it is just a feeling that his gaze follows her. But she could no longer ignore it. Karen got the check, put the goods in her bag, and headed for the exit. She didn't want to disrupt her plans. But when she took a few steps away from the store, he appeared in front of her. A policeman who immediately blocked her path. "Excuse me, ma'am, but I need to ask you a few questions," he said, his voice cold, but there was something unpleasant in it. Karen instantly felt her heart sink for a moment. She stood in front of him, holding her bag calmly in her hands. Should she ask him a question? Why? What exactly does he want to know? What happened? "It's none of your business," she said calmly, but within her irritation. The policeman looked at her suspiciously. "I said you look suspicious. Do you have an explanation for what you're doing here?" Karen was shocked. Suspicious? She was just buying shoes. And yet her instincts told her that there was a reason. It wasn't just her act, it was her skin. She was surprised, but also knew it would be a difficult conversation. Karen felt the pressure building. She was a trained warrior, and any stressful situation for her was primarily a matter of control. However, what happened now was something else. It was an attempt to humiliate her, to devalue everything she had achieved, simply because of her skin color. And this police officer standing in front of her was just a tool of this racism. But she had no intention of giving in. "Officer, I didn't break anything." Her voice was clear, without any emotion. Karen took a step back, trying to create a distance that this man should not cross. The policeman looked at her with suspicion. His hand on his belt was slowly approaching his gun, and it left no doubt. Her heart was racing, but she remained calm, as if in a heavy battle. "Now you just take what's yours," Karen said, loud and clear. "I am an officer in the United States Army, Major Karen Hill, and I will not allow you to treat me like this." The man's gaze slid over her uniform and eyes, and it seemed to get worse. He hadn't expected this. His hand stopped a little, but he didn't even blink. It didn't make him back down. "I don't believe it," he said without any emotion. Karen was surprised. She did not understand what was happening. But then she saw people around her looking at them. This moment, an ordinary public space, people with cameras, mothers covering their children, was her chance. Everyone stood in silence, watching their interaction. They didn't even dare to interfere. But then one young woman with a phone in her hand decided to take the first step. "Are you serious?" Her voice was clear, reflecting her irritation. "This is Major Hill. Have you no shame? You are threatening a man who is serving his country." Karen took a deep breath. She felt the blood pulsing through her veins. The person who was ready to stand on the front lines was now a target for a police officer. And although her hands did not tremble, she knew that her resolve would be a test not only of her personal dignity, but of the entire system. Meanwhile, the man was looking with suspicion at the new group of people who began to approach, holding their phones. The people filming were recording his every move. They were no longer standing aside. Everyone had seen what had happened. "Officer," Karen said, pronouncing his rank clearly, seeing his name on his shoulder straps. "You just made a huge mistake." The policeman felt it. The pressure was building, and if he didn't need one more stressor, there was one more person, the security guard who was approaching him. "What's going on?" he asked, remembering the moment and quickly assessing the situation. Time seemed to be on pause. Now the policeman was at gunpoint. He clenched his teeth and quickly raised his gun, but his hand was no longer so sure. Karen stood in front of him, proudly holding her back, ready to defend her dignity to the last. "Can I talk to your boss?" Karen asked, giving him one last chance to avoid disaster. And then, someone came to Karen's rescue and changed the course of the situation. A middle-aged woman working in the store stepped forward and asked, "Officer, don't you think this is a bit much? What are you doing?" The policeman did not answer. He was stunned, but not ready to back down. His face turned red with anger and nervousness. Everyone was looking at him, and he knew it. Karen stood in front of him like a stone wall. She was not going to back down, even as the situation became more and more tense. Every move she made was carefully considered, every word important. Her gaze, stubborn and determined, never left the policeman, whose hand was still on his gun. She felt her heart racing, but she was not afraid. It was a struggle, not for her freedom, but for the fact that there was no place in society for such treatment of people. "You are wrong, officer." Her voice was calm but deeply convinced. "This is not just an attack on me, it's an attack on all of us." The policeman seemed increasingly confused. His attempts to maintain control began to crack. The feeling that all eyes in the mall were on him made him nervous. He probably hadn't counted on this reaction. Karen knew that this was not just a fight against an individual police officer. It was a fight against a system that allowed people like him to act with impunity. She was just one part of a bigger picture, a part that she believed could make a difference. From the moment Karen announced her rank, the policeman became nervous. He clearly did not expect a black woman in a place like this to be an army officer. Doubt appeared in his eyes, and he seemed unable to accept this fact. "Are you serious? Do you think I'm going to believe you?" His voice became aggressive, and his hand began to move slowly toward the gun again. This was the point at which Karen felt the situation could get out of hand. But she couldn't afford to panic. And then something happened that he definitely did not expect. A young woman who had previously been filming everything on her phone picked it up and started speaking loudly so that everyone around her could hear. "That's racist, man. You have no right to pull a gun on a person who hasn't done anything. You want proof? Here it is." People are standing around and filming the whole thing. Then a few more people from the crowd began to approach Karen. Some started recording everything on their phones, while others were just filming the police officer's eyes. Karen felt this support give her extra strength. She was not alone, and that was important. "Don't you have any shame?" said one woman in the crowd. "Don't you see what you're doing? She served her country. And you're trying to bring her to her knees for what?" The policeman nervously looked around at the people who were gradually approaching him. He knew that now any action he took could cause a scandal. His name would become known throughout the country. But fear did not stop him. He still had his gun drawn. Karen was well aware of this. She looked at him, shaking her head slightly, her eyes showing not only disappointment but also anger. But now was not the time for emotions. This was a moment to act, and she knew that her words and her actions could make a difference. "I don't want any more questions. You have no right to keep me here any longer. And I demand that you go to your superiors," she said, loud and clear. At that moment, one of the guards, who had been on the side earlier, came closer to the police officer. "Officer, this really doesn't look good. We have to call the bosses," said the guard, who was on shift, and his voice sounded stern. The policeman didn't answer right away, but it seemed to make him think. He was in the center of attention, and hundreds of people were watching his every move. The situation was becoming more and more confusing, and he had no choice. But would he have the courage to retreat? Karen looked at him, her every glance a challenge. And she knew there was no mistaking it now. Karen stood there like steel. Her heart was beating faster, but her mind remained cool and sane. She saw the police officer slowly begin to back away, but only because of the pressure from the crowd, which had already begun to grow indignant. There was no doubt in people's eyes. They would not allow him to get out of this situation without consequences. The guard who had approached the policeman was now standing next to Karen. He put his hand on the uniformed man's shoulder, his expression showing that it was hard for him to be involved in this situation, but he was definitely not ready to stand by. Several customers started talking to him, asking why the police officer was acting so aggressively. This was not just an incident, it was a problem that affected everyone. The policeman, realizing that his actions were being scrutinized, lowered his gun. But Karen could see that this did not mean that he admitted his guilt. He may have backed down, but he wasn't ready to understand what he had done wrong. And that surprised her a lot. "I need to speak to your superiors," Karen said again, loud and clear. She didn't want this incident to go away. She knew that her status as a military officer would help her get justice, but that was not enough. She needed this police officer to understand that his behavior was not acceptable. The guard nodded, stepping aside and pulling out his phone. He clearly didn't want the situation to escalate any further. While Karen waited, she noticed that people were filming again. And it was no longer just an attempt to protect her, it was a protest. It was a signal that this behavior could no longer be ignored. Meanwhile, new people appeared on the square in front of the store's entrance. First the manager of the shopping center, and then other employees. They may have seen the rising tension, but they also saw Karen as a person who deserved respect, and this gave them the courage to speak out against the lies. The middle-aged manager quickly approached them. She was clearly concerned about the situation. In her eyes, you could see not only concern, but also understanding. This moment could not be ignored. "Officer," she said to the policeman, clearly and confidently, "we have to call your service. This is unacceptable." The policeman flinched at her words, but even now he did not try to justify his actions. He had no options, and it was obvious. Everyone around him was looking at him, and even he realized that he could not get out of this situation without consequences. Karen did not allow herself to relax. She looked at the policeman. Her face remained cold, but her eyes were determined. She realized that this incident would be an important milestone. If she was forced to be part of this scenario, she would do everything to make sure it didn't remain the same. And then, as the policeman stood in absolute despair, another figure appeared. It was a police captain, a middle-aged woman with a clear and confident step. She saw the situation on the spot and immediately approached Karen and the policeman. "What's going on here?" she asked, her voice imperative. Karen answered without losing her cool. "This officer tried to illegally detain me and threaten me with a weapon simply because of the color of my skin. I demand that this be investigated." The captain, who had just arrived, immediately assessed the situation. Her eyes quickly ran over the police officer who was standing there, and she realized that there were serious consequences here. "Officer, put your gun away. And leave the area until I deal with this," she ordered, her voice firmly resolute. The policeman did not argue, although his eyes showed anger and confusion. His hands trembled slightly as he slowly holstered his weapon. Everyone knew that his reaction was only the beginning. These events would be discussed in the news for a long time to come. But for Karen, it was just a small victory on a long journey of struggle. Justice had to be done, and she was ready to do anything to make it happen. And so, when the police officer, no longer carrying a gun, stepped back, Karen felt a little tension ease off her. However, she was not going to stop. She was convinced that this was not just an incident, and that her actions would make a difference in the system. The police captain who arrived at the scene carefully studied the situation and realized that this was not just a matter of Karen's personal safety. It was a matter of principles. She took a deep breath and looked at the police officer, who stood with his head slightly down. "Officer, I demand an explanation," she said, her voice still calm but with great power in it. "Your actions are completely unacceptable, and they must be explained not only to me, but also to the public." The policeman was silent. His eyes slid over the crowd that had now gathered around him. Most people were filming on their phones, and some were already looking indignant. The captain turned to Karen. "We're going to solve this, Major. You have my full support," she said, nodding. Everyone around them became a little less tense, but Karen felt that it was not over yet. The policeman had to be punished, and it was important that everyone saw how the system should work when it was functioning properly. Later that day, Karen received a phone call from the captain. She informed her that the police officer, Officer Benson, had been immediately suspended and an investigation had been opened. Karen was somewhat relieved, but she did not forget that this was only a small part of a bigger problem. From that moment on, the video of the incident went viral. People all over the country were discussing how a police officer had tried to humiliate and intimidate a woman who was serving her country for no reason and simply because of the color of her skin. Karen's support grew, and she received calls from various organizations offering support and congratulations for her courage. Still, she realized that this was only the beginning. A few weeks later, an investigation revealed that Officer Benson had numerous complaints of racial profiling that had not been properly addressed. His police career ended, and the investigation drew attention to serious problems in the law enforcement system. The captain who arrived on the scene at the time was also recognized for her determination and support of Karen. Karen did realize that the incident had changed her life, but not in the way she expected. She has become a symbol of the fight against systemic injustice, but she is not looking for fame. She wants the voices of those who are unable to express their outrage to be heard. She wants her experience to be a lesson for others. "This is not about me. This is about all of us," she said in an interview, and these words have become a motto for many. And although Karen saw this incident as a small but important victory in the fight against racism, she knew there was still much work to be done. It was just one page in the book of the fight for justice. And Karen was ready to keep going, carrying this heavy but necessary cross until the system was changed for good.